Hey, there is still exactly 1 week left before the summer break, so I'm pretty excited, not gonna lie. What's up? And today I'm gonna do a review of the very new album from Gorillaz, the Now. So if you don't know who Gorillaz is, they are a virtual band formed in the UK, because none of the members actually exist. They are actually creatures animated and designed by Jamie Hewlett. But there's one thing for sure, that 2D is actually Damon Albarn, is voiced by Damon Albarn, at least. And Damon Albarn is basically the head of Gorillaz. And all the other band members are all flexible, meaning that they can be any musician as long as Damon Albarn approves. So well, let's talk about the virtual band members, though. There are 2D, which is Damon Albarn, basically. There are Noodle, there is Russell, which is the drummer, and then there is Murdoch. Except Murdoch is kind of gone on this album. He's in jail for some reason after Humans, and he's replaced by Ace for some reason, which is a villain from Powerpuff Girls, I think. I forgot, but not gonna lie, Gorillaz had a very amazing start to their discography. First, with Self-Titled, which is a really solid, but yet somewhat cheeky, slick, and dark album, blending pop, rap, rock, and electronic together, and they do that even more on Demon Days, which is one of the best albums of the 2000s, and definitely Gorillaz' best album. And then they released Plastic Beach, which is also a pretty amazing album. It's even quirkier, it's even more conceptual, and it has a lot of nice tracks on it. And then they started to go downhill with Humans, which is released in 2017. You know, it has a lot of drab tracks on it, and then there are also a shit ton of features on Humans, and they kind of distracted the music, the focus from Gorillaz' core sound. And then they kind of went downhill with Humans, which is released in 2017. And Humans has a lot of drab tracks, it has a lot of distracting features, and it sounds like a compilation album curated by Damon Albarn, which isn't really that great. However, there are still a few great tracks on Humans, but only a few. The rest are pretty underwhelming. And then, in just shortly a year's time, they released the Now, which is basically a change in pace with a shorter track list and less features. And that's why this album is less ambitious and less extravagant as Humans. And on this album, the musical style of Gorillaz drastically changed as well. Instead of making slick and catchy and groovy, dancey, rap, rock, electronic, pop blends, they started to make these really relaxing, psychedelic, synth-funk, moody beach pop tracks that are not that exciting and are very bland and mundane at times. Yeah, it's a really unexciting album, and maybe it is way more focused than Humans. Still, Gorillaz feels lost on this album. Okay, here we go. Next page of my script. But the music fans of Damon Albarn kind of saw this moody direction coming, because Damon Albarn's last solo project is really moody, Blur's last project is kind of moody, and Gorillaz' new project, yes, also very moody, although it's quirkier and a little bit more fun and a little bit more cartoony and animated, but still it's really mundane, really unexciting, and really one-dimensional. The album starts off with Humility, which has a really subtle beat to it, and we have these synths that are really bland. It keeps beeping in the background, and it doesn't serve anything to this track, so
calling the world from isolation, 'cause right now that's the ball where we return.
It's really underwhelming. It's a really boring track. It kind of washes out the whole time for the duration of this track, and I have to give it a 4 out of 10 because it's just really underwhelming. But the pace of the album kind of picks back up a little bit on Tranz, which is a way more catchy and dancey track. It has these nimble melodies that are actually kind of memorable, and the chorus is actually really refreshing. The synth riffs are actually really dancey. They kind of remind me of Revolving Doors off of The Fall. And yeah, surprisingly, I actually really dig this song, and I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. And the third track is actually quite decent too, not gonna lie. It sounds very nocturnal and groovy and quirky as well. And it is basically a blend of techno and synth funk. And it blends it really well. And I also really like the quirky synths intro to this track, as well as Snoop Dogg's feature, which is pretty cold-blooded and chill and relaxing. So I'm giving Hollywood a 7 to an 8. I kind of like 2D's singing on this track as well. Not his singing chops, but more like the melody. Jealousy is gunfire. And then we get Kansas, which is a pretty slow and moody jam track, and it has a really relaxing and psychedelic holiday vibe to it that I really like. And there's also a really subtle glam rock influence on this track that I somewhat enjoy.
I'm not gonna cry. I got more time to give.
And I also really like the nostalgic chords on this track. And there is also a repeated line in the lyrics saying, you know, I'm not gonna cry. And it's a pretty smart line, to be honest. I'm also giving Kansas an 8 out of 10. Yeah, you know, so if humility is cut out of the album, the first half of the album is actually really solid, to be honest. And what's the next track? I'm kind of lost. Okay, the next track is Sorcerers, which is a pretty tame and mundane synth funk track. It sounds like an instrumental, but then it's not. But the reason why it sounds like an instrumental track is because 2D's singing on this track is just so insignificant, and that's why his vocals are kind of overshadowed by all these synth funk instrumentals. And you know, this track kind of reminds me of elevator music for some reason, and also supermarket music. It's the kind of synth funk, relaxing synth funk music that you would hear in like a supermarket while you're shopping. So yeah, I'm not too impressed with this track. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. And then we have Idaho, which is a really sweet and dreamy ballad that you know, it's still a little funky maybe, but not as funky and as plastic and as electronic as other tracks on this album. I like the strange squeaky sound effects. It's kind of creative. It's kind of a nice touch. And I like how psychedelic and drug-induced this track sounds, but still, it's such an underwhelming track. It doesn't feel like it has any impact or anything. It doesn't feel like it serves this album in the full picture. So it's still a very underwhelming track that I wish could be a little more ambitious. I'm giving it a 6 to a 5 out of 10. And the next track is Magic City, which is also one of the highlights on this album. Although, again, it's not great, it's not epic, it's not mind-blowing or anything, but it's not bad, it's decent. It kind of reminds me of David Bowie for some reason. And I like the haunting, moody synths on this track as well. The lyrics are somewhat provocative. And this track is the track on the entire album where Damon Albarn sounds the most alive. So that's a good thing. So I'm giving Magic City a 7 out of 10. And then the next track, oh boy, it's really messy. Lake Zurich, Zurich, if American, but I'm just gonna say Zurich because I like it pronounced in that way. Anyway, like Zurich is a surprisingly on-point and dancey synth-funk track that's not as dejected or as messy as other synth-funk tracks on this album. And yeah, it's way more catchy. I love the jazzy drums that goes high and low. It kind of reminds me of Parquet Court's Wide Awake for some reason. And it's just a really nice little relaxing instrumental piece. I'm also giving this track a 7 out of 10. And yeah, and then we have a Fireflies, which is a really lavishing slow jam track. We get these warping synths in the back that's very subtle. And I mean, it's not like it's great, but it's kind of interesting sounding. But still, it's a really underwhelming and minimal track on this track list. And again, it doesn't really serve Gorillaz that much. So I'm giving Fireflies a 5 out of 10. And then we have 1%, which has these pulsating, stringy synths in the background. That's a little obnoxious at times. And the instrumental is, again, very subtle, very minimal, just like the previous track, Fireflies. And yeah, it sounds very inconclusive. The climax kind of leads to nowhere on this track. So I have to give this track 1%, a 4 out of 10. Yeah, 1%. Such an underwhelming song title as well. And yeah, the album ends off with Souk. I believe that's how it's pronounced. But it's basically this very dejected, sad ballad that has a very strong and thick nostalgia vibe to it. And you also get these wimpy guitars and these shakes, these pss, pss shakes, if you know what I mean. I don't know what's the name of the instrument. So the first half of Souk is not bad at all, but the second half is actually pretty damn great. You know, you get these disco strings that makes up for a very dramatic and climactic ending for the entire album. And I really dig this track, actually. Although, again, it's not great, and in the full picture, it doesn't really serve much to Gorillaz, the band, the virtual band, but still, I kind of dig the ending of the album. I'm giving Souk a 7 to an 8 out of 10. Overall, it's a really mundane and surface level album. To be honest, there is nothing too exciting about this album. And yeah, it's very low impact. It's not that exciting or eventful. And this album is gonna split a lot of Gorillaz fans. Fans who enjoy Gorillaz as a very slick and catchy and groovy dance pop group is gonna hate this album, but die-hard fans of Gorillaz who appreciate their different directions and sounds and approaches may really enjoy this album. So I don't know. If there's one great thing about this album is that this album is really sonically consistent. Every track are also very moody, very relaxing, very nostalgic, and this album is also very focused as well, way more focused than Humans. But still, it's a really underwhelming, moody album. You know, the Now Now to Gorillaz is like the Division Bell to Pink Floyd. Not like it's an awful, terrible album or anything, but it's just a very underwhelming, moody album. That may be somewhat pleasant, but still, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that great. So yeah, the worst is Humility, and the best is a Tranz, in my opinion. Yeah, Tranz is probably the best. Oh boy. I'm giving Gorillaz' The Now a 5 to a 6 out of 10. So, have you listened to the new Gorillaz album, The Now, from 1 to 10? How much would you rate it? Like if you like it, hate if you hate it, and subscribe if you want more.